All right, let's talk about supply and demand. Now, our basic thing is price and quantity, some function representing a demand curve, some function representing a supply curve. Obviously, we're going to start by thinking about where our equilibrium is, but we also want to ask about what sorts of stories can we tell with this. So, the stories we might tell, first off, is anything shifting supply and or demand. Shifting curves. And that's going to be anything where we're breaking ceteris paribus. So as a reminder, this is not math, this is just econ. The law of demand says that as price increases, quantity demanded decreases, and vice versa, all else held equal, or ceteris paribus. So anytime we increase price, if we're still holding all else equal, then we're moving up the demand curve, right? Or we decrease price, we move down the demand curve. And for supply, same sort of a thing. Let's just use a second color to make this point. For the law of supply, we would have quantity supplied increases, and if price goes down, quantity supplied decreases. And again, it's still ceteris paribus. All right, so shifting curves, and then when we're shifting curves, we can think about how things change. So change in our equilibrium quantity. I've said it before, but this triangle is Greek delta. And delta we use for change. And then, of course, change in price. And then we could think about changes in total surplus, right? So if demand increases, something becomes more valuable, that means that we're going to be getting more total surplus from that good, all else equal. All right, so shifting curves, that's one story we can talk about. Taxes, we have already talked about, as well as subsidies, which is just a negative tax or reverse tax. And again, here we can think about changes in quantity and price. And now we're going to bring in also dead weight loss. And then let's call it fiscal effects. The amount of money spent on a subsidy or the amount of money brought in by taxes. Let's see, change in quantity and price. Let's go ahead and get that down. And dead weight loss is going to cover, well, I guess we could also think in, let's go ahead and make that explicit also. Change in total surplus, which is going to involve producer and consumer surplus. So we can say here also change in total surplus. Now what I'd like you to be thinking about and figuring out for the near future is going to be price controls. So price controls, again, we want to think about dead weight loss. Here we're going to also be thinking about shortage or surplus. Surplus not in the sense of total surplus, but surplus in the sense of, is there a greater quantity supplied than the quantity demanded at that price? Dead weight loss / surplus. And then we can also bring in unintended consequences. So with a maximum price that's set too low, how might we tell the story graphically of problems of misallocation? How might we tell stories about people waiting in line and giving up the use of their scarce, non-replaceable resource of time by waiting for something where the price is abnormally low? So these are sort of the big areas of supply and demand that I cover in a principles class. And we want to be thinking about these in light of the generalized linear supply and demand that I mentioned in another video. And that is basically, we set this up as, let's call it, we could say price equals, A plus B QD, and then price equals C plus D QS, right? That's one way we could set this up. So in this case, we would think of our demand curve. A would be up here, our price intercept, and then B would be a negative value giving us this slope. D would be the slope of S, and C would be the price intercept there. We could also think about this the other way. So this technically is an inverse demand curve and an inverse supply curve. We would normally think of quantity demanded as being some function of the price. So in that case, we're essentially taking this, it's hard to do in limited space, we're taking these axes and we're flipping them like this. So in the case of the demand curve, we're still going to have some negatively sloped thing. So let's call this, let's use new letters. W, X, Y, Z, that's enough. All right. W plus X, price, QS can be Y plus Z price, where here we're thinking about price as it is affecting the buyer. So in that case, let's go ahead and just draw the graph. Price, quantity. We're still going to have this positive correlation, this positive, no, correlation, it's not the right word, this direct relationship and an inverse relationship for demand, right? So we're still going to have demand looks like this and supply looks like this, but we're going to interpret it a little bit differently. But sometimes setting up the algebra like this works for us. So in any case, what we want to be thinking about, especially going into the midterm, is how to use either of these sorts of setups to tell these sorts of stories. I'm going to stop there. I want you to be fleshing this out in your notes, and I want you to be trying this, right? Think about how to actually set up, say, the story of a minimum wage where we have price restricted to something, to some level, and how that's going to change the outcomes. Start by practicing with the graphs because you've seen those before. Review supply and demand and how it goes through all these different things, but really make an attempt to try and set up the math yourself. You're going to make mistakes, and that's fine, right? You're going to stumble, but that's part of the process. We will talk about this in class in the near future together, but it's going to be a whole lot more useful if you have tried and failed than if you just see it done by someone else the first time. All right, good luck. And as always, if you've got questions, ask them in the Discord or in the class blog.